Hi, I'm Deb Geyer. I'm with the Quilters Hall of Fame in Marion, Indiana. This video conference was recorded July 21st, 2023, during the celebration of Ellie Sienkiewicz's induction to the Quilters Hall of Fame. Ellie was at her home in Bozeman, Montana. Ellie shared with us her thoughts about her award, about her first quilt, and about her love of Baltimore album quilts. Then Rhonda McAllen shared with us insights into each of Ellie's 10 quilts that were on display during celebration. These quilts will also be on display at the Quilters Hall of Fame August 1st through September 30th, 2023. It's a beautiful collection of Baltimore album quilts. Thank you, Rhonda, for sharing with us your knowledge of Baltimore album quilts. And Ellie, congratulations. Thank you for your many contributions to the world of quilting.
I'd love to say hello, quilt friends. I'm here with my Quilters Hall of Fame necklace around my neck. We're in Montana. I have a touch of dementia. I'm trying to think where in Montana we are. Bozeman, Montana. Where we live in an old log cabin across from Mountains Walking Bar, where we get a lot of our food. Okay, so I'm so happy to be here, my friends. Quilting it's touched my soul, and quilt friends are the best. So I have a script here. Let's see. I've been a school teacher, a history teacher, an aspiring artist. It seems inevitable that I fell into the pond of Baltimore album quilts. It reflects my aspirations in a remarkable way. They're, in my view, the most beautiful of quilt genres, almost high art, maybe high art. They're the highlight of our history over the past 2 centuries. The art form of quilting is irresistible and accessible to all, which is remarkable. I enjoyed teaching others about it, writing books about it. It's been a great adventure. Mostly, I think of quilt friends. We are a circle of people who understand each other. It's been a wonderful journey. Lots of teaching, taught on cruises, which was fun. I taught in overseas places and at home. So I'm first grateful for these blessings and opportunities, and for the capstone recognition of this honor. I'm wearing this beautiful Quilters Hall of Fame. I don't know if you can see this necklace around my neck, but it's lovely. I'll probably surprise people as I wear this around my neck all over town, and they'll wonder what the big Q is on a blue one. Anyway, the first quilt that I ever made is the one that you can see over here. It's called Wyman House. My father was dean of the graduate school in Princeton. So I remember sitting in the yard there and working this out. It has the beautiful house here. My father was dean. He was also in a wheelchair. So it had this nice front yard here. there were 3 of us, Donald, Alex, and Katja, my father and mother. So this is my first, we'll call it an album quilt. It was my first quilt. It says faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love, is how that ends. Anyway, so here is this elegant house. And there is it looks like a chapel, but it's actually the eating hall. And then there are these beautiful gardens behind. I used to love walking in those gardens. And that's my angel up above. And then some more trees in the background. All right. My beloved daughter, Gotcha, is holding this for me. And I'm enjoying late life. So if I need prompting, I think she's going to help me. So let's see. My father was dean of the graduate school. And this first quilt is dated 1963. It's been a long and rewarding journey. Recounted better than I could by Rhonda. Rhonda is a longtime friend and just a wonderful person. One of my greatest blessings is that she and my daughter have become good friends. I think probably over this Hall of Fame recognition, which I'm so honored by. Okay. I'm looking at the audience now. Hi there. Aw, you sweethearts. And we're all quilters, and it's such a wonderful club to belong to, isn't it? You find a quilter, you found a friend. So I'm enjoying watching you on of all wonderful technologies, my daughter's phone. She's kneeling here beside me. So thank you and goodbye. Kisses to all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank-
Okay. Well, this is my last leg. Yay. But I'm so glad all of you are here to see Ellie's wonderful quilts. They're really spectacular. And as you go through each of the quilts, you're going to see how there's little things about each quilt that is really a part of Ellie's life. And most of the blocks, she either altered some of the classic blocks or actually designed them herself. So you wouldn't find them in the albums. But the thing about Ellie's quilts is that they were made in the spirit of the original Baltimore album quilts. And that is Ellie did not make these quilts. Now, Ellie made this quilt, but these quilts were made by a group, just like the original quilts were made by groups of women, and different women in her classes throughout the US and Europe made the blocks that went into her quilts. So Ellie always encouraged everyone to put in your quilt the emblems of your life, just the same way that the quilters of bygone Baltimore did with theirs. And the original quilts have such an interesting history because they were made at a time when women did not have a voice, when they stitched into their quilts their religious belief or their political persuasion or their support of the temperance movement, or their husbands were odd fellows. And if you were in Baltimore in 1850 and you walked down the sidewalk, you very well could see a Baltimore album quilt being displayed in the front window downstairs of one of the row houses. Usually in those houses, there was a business at the bottom many times, and then the family lived in the top two floors. So as you walked by, you can see that this woman, oh, her husband's an odd fellow. So it gave women a voice to tell the world what they believed in and what was important to them. And I think these quilts that Ellie has mentored through the many years of her teaching career and writing career does the same thing. So the first quilt that was made in between 85 and 91 is the quilt here. And it's Alex's album quilt. And this quilt is it is very much in line with the old German paper cutting method, Scherenschnitt. And it's kind of like a snowflake. You would take a sheet of paper and you fold it in half and then fold it in half and fold it in quarters, and you'd cut out the snowflake and open it up. And there you would have your design. And that is how the blocks on this quilt were designed in that form. The one thing about Baltimore during the early period in the 40s and the 50s, the Germans had a huge influence on Baltimore. It's said that you could live in Baltimore as a German and never learn English. They had German schools, German newspapers, German grocery stores, German churches, German neighborhoods. So the German influx of German immigrants during that period of time was really, really large. So you see the German influence in the Baltimore album quilts. Probably the inspiration for this quilt would have been a quilt that was made around 1844, 1845, which was made by Sarah Seidenstricker. And she was a German lady, German descent, who originally lived in Pennsylvania, married, moved to Baltimore. And you can see it was set on point, just like Ellie's was set on point, along with the palmetto border. And it was a group quilt that many of those blocks Ellie designed herself. You can see in some of them in the upper left-hand corner is a cat. There's another one that's an eagle. One on the right side looks like a little man. You kind of have to look closely, but there's some little hidden symbols in some of those paper cut blocks. The patterns for the quilt are in Paper Cuts in Plenty, and you'll be able to find them there. So the next quilt is The Fascinating Ladies of Bygone Baltimore, and it was quilt for her son Donald. And it is always have to look, it's over here, it's on this back wall over here in the corner. And the quilt originated from a contest from the book Spoken Without a Word, her first book that we talked about a little earlier today, that was published in 1983. And the blocks are from that contest, and they're the original block designs, or adapted blocks that were done by Ellie. Ellie felt like the quilting in that quilt brought the quilt to life. And it was, the quilting was done by a woman named Hazel Farrell, and she won the Great American Quilt Contest in 1986 for West Virginia. It is inspired by the tradition of the 19th century Baltimore bride's quilt. And Ellie wrote, I believe it's on the back of the quilt, it says, "This quilt is dedicated to Donald by his mother with the thought that it may perhaps someday be a groom's quilt. Donald is 16 at this writing, December 13th, 1987. So I think, I know that Donald's been married for many, many years, so I guess it worked. Also in that quilt, in the lower left-hand corner, I believe, or right-hand corner, and I think it's the lower right-hand corner, the fleur de lis, in the center of that block, it says, "Made for Donald Sienkiewicz in honor of his election to the Order of the Arrows, BSA." And the Order of the Arrow is a recognized Scouts oath and law designation. So that, if you're wondering, it ties to the Boy Scouts of America. Now, this quilt, entitled When You See This, Remember Me, a Mother's Day quilt. Now, this one was designed and sewn by Ellie. So take a good look at this, because there's not many that's totally sewn by Ellie. And it's a beautiful quilt. It's kind of a break in the tradition that Ellie really had quilts made in. And of course, that's Ellie in the center. And it says the original silhouette was drawn of Ellie by her husband, Stan. The quilt was designed and sewn by Ellie and quilted by Joyce Hill and her mother of Ben's Run, West Virginia. It was completed by June 1987 and was first hung at the West Coast Quilters Conference in July 1987. Now, this quilt, which is also on this back wall over here, was Stan's anniversary quilt. And it's inscribed to Stan in celebration of 20 wedded years with love, Ellie, June 7th, 1989. And many of those blocks can be found in the Baltimore Beauties and Beyond Volume 2 book. In that quilt, in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a block that is based on one of the original blocks. It was The Little Hunter, and it was first published in Spoken Without a Word. It has a peony border, kind of a double border, inner border and outer border. It also has the Washington Monument, which is right here on the right in the second row, on the left in the second row, which is a monument that you see in many, many Baltimore quilts. Baltimore was the monument city. So you'll see the Washington Monument, the Ringgold Monument, the Watson Monument, the Battle Monument. I can't think of any more, but there's a lot of them. So that's very Baltimore. The peacocks throughout history are kind of known as a symbol of immortality. So there she's got the peacock as well. Now, this is one of my very favorite quilts. I love this border. Haven't decided to duplicate it yet. Not sure I want to make all those little berries. Anyway, this one is called the Odense Album. And it was a group quilt that was designed and made under Ellie's direction. And it was displayed at the Quilt Expo in Europe in May of 1990. And it is a tribute to Hans Christian Andersen, and his tales, which he felt was a gift to the world. Odense is the name of Denmark's oldest city and is the hometown of Hans Christian Andersen. And that's who what the quilt was made to honor. An interesting block in that quilt, in the upper right and lower left-hand corners, is the heart with the little berries. And that block is called a Jackson's Heart. And we first find that design on a quilt at the DAR from about 1845. And inside the inscription in the original quilt said that the blessings of government, like the dew of heaven, should be equally dispersed on the rich and poor. And then inside the heart was inscribed Andrew Jackson's heart. So the original Baltimores had many political symbols on them, that being one of them in reference to Jackson, who was a favored political figure in that area. But there's two other symbols political symbols you're going to see on original Baltimore's. One is a log cabin that was symbolic of the Whig Party. And the other is a rooster, which is symbolic of the Democratic Party at the time. And it's interesting because the rooster, as that symbol, came out of Hancock County, Indiana in the 1840 elections. So Indiana's got a little bit of a tie to some of that. And this one has, as I said, the grapevine border, but it also has a traditional Maryland border, which is a step border. And that border is seen, maybe some Southern Pennsylvania quilts, maybe a few Northern Virginia quilts, but definitely Maryland quilts had that step border. And they're really kind of known for that. So this quilt that's here behind me is an album in honor of Mother, 1990 to 1992. And this quilt has a very classic Baltimore block in the center, which is the Bible block with the rose lyre around it. It was a group quilt designed and made under the direction of Ellie. The block patterns are found in her book, Dimensional Applique. And as you see, many of the florals are her dimensional florals. That was really kind of Ellie's own design. The original Baltimore's, don't have the ribbon and flowers on them, but they do have this flower on them. And that's a ruched rose. And those are harder to do than they look, I've decided. Get them proportional. And Mimi's laughing because she knows I'm right. So, but it has the traditional Bible. The feather border is in reverse applique. Now, this quilt, I'm going to show you the original Baltimore that this quilt was really styled after. There it is. Now, you see the border's the same. Even the scalloped edging is the same. And I think that's really unusual and just beautiful. This was a quilt that was made in 1848 by Mary Updegraff, and she was in Hagerstown, Maryland, so not too far out of Baltimore. But it's you can see it's very similar to this one. So Ellie took her inspiration from that quilt. Now this quilt here, which is right here on this other wall, is called Happiness is in the Journey. And it was done, it was made in 2007 by a volunteer group from the Annual Applique Academy in Williamsburg, as well as the Heartbeat Quilts and the Heartbeat Quilt Shop and Applique by the Bay's annual seminar that was part of Mayor's Bears Quilt Shop. I think many of you will remember Mayor's Bears because the Applique Academy was there for several years. All of the blocks in the cartouches were designed by Ellie, and the calligraphy on that quilt was done by Ellie as well. That quilt has a technique that she was teaching in Lewis one year, which if you look at the silhouettes in the little green cartouches, as well as the sails on the clipper ship, you'll see that they have some shading to them. And that's not the original fabric that has that shading. What she did is she took oil pastels and she took a piece of muslin and would rub the oil pastels, and she would draw the design on the muslin, and then she would shade it with the pastel to give it that either kind of antique or dirty or shadowed effect. And then she would put a cloth over it and set it with an iron. And it does a fabulous job on the sails. She did the same thing with those silhouettes. She would draw it on a piece of freezer paper, cut it out, iron the freezer paper down, and then draw the color into the cloth around the cutout part of the freezer paper, and then set it with an iron and remove the freezer paper. And it's a very effective method that I actually still use today in my applique, especially when I'm doing like shaded flowers, shaded roses. You can really get a painterly look. You just have to be really careful and not get it too heavy, because you don't want it to come out on the rest of your quilt. But if you set it well with an iron, you're good to go. That quilt is obviously in miniature. It was one that I was supposed to have participated in. And when Betty Augustine sent the block to me, I was like, are you kidding? There is no way. I can't even see these pieces, much less sew them on. So I didn't participate in it. But the center of that block is a clipper ship. And Baltimore is very famous for their clipper ships. They were the fastest ships on the sea at the time. They carried cargo to and from Germany and Liverpool. Lots of fabric came out of Liverpool at England at the time. In fact, a lot of the calicos and the fabrics that you see in the original Baltimore's were being produced in Liverpool, and as well as American, the New England mills were producing a lot of calicos as well. Between 1840 and 1860, the calico production in America actually doubled. And it's kind of interesting because the Europeans had, or the English had, a misconception of what Americans wanted. They were afraid that Americans were going to want American fabric. So they printed an American name on the selvage of their fabric. And Americans were afraid that the English were outdoing them in quality of fabric, which they probably were actually. So they printed English names on the selvage of their fabric. So now for those of us who are like, ooh, where did that fabric come from? And we're going through all the swatch books to try to identify stuff and really going down deep, deep rabbit holes. Who knows? I don't know if it's English or if it's American. You know, sometimes you can tell, and I'm not a fabric expert at all, but it is interesting to know that England and America were very much in competition with their fabrics during this time. But that clipper ship had a lot to do with it. The clipper ships at the time also were kind of like commuter trains. They ran what they called packets between Baltimore, Charleston, South Carolina, Philadelphia, New York. So they were, really involved in a lot of people. I think, or at least I used to think, that people back in that time didn't travel a lot. That is so wrong. They traveled a lot and they really got around. And the clipper ship was a big part of that. Let's see if I read it all. I think so. Oh, one other block that's on there that I know that Ellie really loved, and that is the anchor block. And that it's right there too, though. It's the second block down to the left of the clipper ship. And the anchor, especially on the original albums, was a Christian symbol. It was called an anchor cross, or the cross of hope. And it was referenced to a scripture in Hebrews 6:19, which says, which hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, enters into that within the curtain being the temple. And so that is I know that Ellie loved that block with the Christian anchor on it. Now, this quilt is one of my favorite quilts, especially because of the center medallion, and it's back here in the corner. So this quilt was made for Ellie by volunteers of the Applique on the Bay annual seminar at Mayor's Bears in Lewis, Delaware. The center medallion was designed by Ellie, and it's called The Goose Girl Goes Fishing on the Bay, and it was appliqued by Nancy Kearns. Ellie inked the medallion calligraphy, and she inked all of the cartouches. Now, that center block is interesting because there's a lot going on there. So some of the original quilts had a pastoral scene that we called Goose Girl, and neither I or any of my quilt history friends can remember or find out where the term Goose Girl came from. So don't ask me because I don't know. I have racked in my brain. Mimi, do you know?
Wasn't there a lot with a girl and a goose?
There is. There's several blocks with a girl in pantaloons walking. She's got geese. It's a little house and a little picket fence. And it's found on a half dozen quilts, quite a few. And she's called the Goose Girl. But this is Ellie's rendition of the Goose Girl. Now, this is not just the only one. Everywhere Ellie quilted, she kind of came up with a design for the Goose Girl. So there was the Goose Girl and the Ground Tetons, if I say that right. Did I say that right, Lori? Goose Girl doing different things. This Goose Girl was fishing. And this block is reminiscent of a couple of things. One, it is designed to depict Lewis, Delaware, which I didn't say that the other day and I should have, but it is to depict Lewis, Delaware. But it's also done, it's very reminiscent of what we call the William Tell block, where William Tell, it's the chapel, you see the ship in the background. It's the story of how William Tell escaped his captors. That block you can see in the American Folk Art Museum's quilt. And then there's one in a private collection as well. The cartouche around that block it came from another quilt called the Hervé quilt that is a designer one, very high-end quilt that had the pastoral scenes in this circular cartouche with the little leaves coming out. But many of these blocks are definitely, they're miniature blocks, they're 8-inch blocks, not quite as small as those. But the original Baltimore blocks were about 12, or Ellie's design blocks for 12 inches. The original Baltimores were a little bigger than that. I usually do mine at 16 inches, just because I think they're easier to handle that size. But the fruit of pern in this quilt also has the pastel shading technique that Ellie had developed. Now, this quilt almost looks Celtic to me, but these blocks, Ellie designed, I think all of these blocks actually, and the quilt is called Faith, Hope, and Love, and it was created in 2009. It has a scroll border with a mariner's type compass in the corners, and it's a paper cut medallion pattern made by Ellie, and it features photo transfers of family photographs, India ink and dip pen calligraphy. Paper cut blocks were specifically designed motifs meaningful to Ellie's family life. And again, we have a quilt that was set on point, which I think is particularly attractive with the paper cuts for some reason, but it creates a very, very balanced quilt. Now, what's really special about this quilt is on the back, it has these little houses, and Ellie has done calligraphy and a photo transfer of different members of her family. And she tells the story of how these people are special to her and the meaning and who they are. And then the kind of the quilt that looks like it's laying over the, laying down there at the bottom corresponds. You can see the writing there. It corresponds to the blocks on the front of the quilt. So you understand what meaning each of those blocks. If you look carefully at those paper cuts, you're going to see either little people, little things that brought meaning to Ellie's life. Our last quilt here is Baltimore Arabesque. And it's an album quilt that was created in October of 2009. And they are 5 of the blocks were taught by Ellie in her Empty Spools class in Asilomar in Pacific Grove. And the embellishments on the quilt, embroidery, ribbon work, and beadwork. The quilting is a herringbone in trapunto. And this has a very deep step border. It's 6 steps, which is pretty amazing to do a step border like that. The quilt features the dimensional ribbon flowers that Ellie is kind of famous for, but it also has a goose girl block. And if you look at the pastoral scenes within those red cartouches, again, these are scenes that Ellie created that relate to her life. And many of these blocks were, well, all of these blocks actually were made by her students, and they contributed to all of these quilts, which I think is really, really special. So Ellie believed that the Baltimore quilters skillfully wove together symbols from their old world with emblems of the new, and skillfully navigating the changing tides of society. And we see here, these are wonderful examples of group quilts, women that Ellie brought together that became lifelong friends that would never have met. When I was at the Applique Academy, my very first year, it was in Annapolis, and the lodging and the classes were held in the different state houses that are around the Capitol. So some of the classes were in the main building, but then you had to drag your suitcase down the street to the next building where your room might be. Well, the first night I had gotten in really late and checked in, and the little bellboy came and took my suitcase. And now all of you who know me know I am the worst overpacker in the world. I always have to pay for my suitcase to get on the plane. I just figured that into my travel costs. So I have a suitcase about this tall, about this wide. And when we got up to the little state house where we were going to stay, the bellboy took the key and he opened the door and he pushed my suitcase in. He slammed the door and he ran off. And I was like, oh my God, what is going on here? And then I realized my room was on the 3rd floor. There was not an elevator, and the stairs were this wide. And he was not taking that suitcase after he dragged it all the way from the lobby to the base. So I'm thinking, do I unpack my suitcase piece by piece and walk off and upstairs? Thinking, no, 3 floors is just way too much to do that. So then I decided, do I push it or do I pull it up the stairs? So I decided to start pulling it up the stairs. And from above, literally from above, I hear, hey, do you need help down there? I was like, oh my God, it's an angel. Somebody is gonna. And lo and behold, it was Nancy Kearns.
Oh.
And she comes running down. Well, I pull, she pushes. We get my suitcase up there. And that was 1996. And Nancy and I have been really good friends ever since. And Nancy went on my travels to study quilts, to do the history. She helped me make the Rachel Myers quilt. She did a fabulous job on some of those blocks. And that's what happens. You know, I said in the talk earlier that women that are album quilt makers are kind of a subculture, and we really are. And we kind of really all know each other or know of each other or have heard each other's names somewhere in our travels and in our classes. And we do truly become friends for life. Susan Day is another one, went on all these trips with me. We've been friends since what, 96? Yeah. Been through marriages, divorces, kids, illness, or at least I have. She hasn't, but she stuck with me, thank God. And so it's a wonderful thing to have this type of friendship. And I think Ellie, more than anyone else in my life, fostered that friendship, that camaraderie that I have with people who have become pillars in my life. Thank you.